You'd be surprised what a single envelope can do, especially when it's stamped with your name and the quiet weight of history. I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight we'll shuffle open one draft card after another, watching ordinary boys swap small-town sidewalks for muddy boots, and drill sergeants with too much coffee in their veins. Inside that paper fold sits the future in block letters, your age, your address, your duty. Did your fingers shake when you tore it open? Did you smell the ink, the cheap government paper, the faint trace of machine oil that clung to the post office walls? Maybe you were leaning against the chipped wood counter when the clerk handed it over, or maybe it slid through a rusty mailbox slot, landing next to your mother's grocery list and a neighbor's overdue gas bill. If these stories are already tugging at your sleepy curiosity, go ahead, tap like and subscribe. Who knows? Maybe the algorithm likes warm socks and whispered secrets too. And if you're the sort who listens under blankets, tell me, where are you? And what century would you draft yourself into if you had the choice? Now settle in, because that envelope isn't the end. It's just the first sound of boots on a long rattling train. So you stand there, draft card in one hand, a half-packed suitcase in the other. Maybe your father watches from the porch, arms crossed, remembering his own war. Or maybe he stares too long at the floorboards, pretending he doesn't hear your mother's quiet sobs behind the bedroom door. The house feels smaller now, like the walls are closing in to whisper secrets you're not meant to know yet. Within days, you're on a bus, rumbling down two-lane highways that cut through cornfields and sleepy crossroads towns. You press your forehead to the glass, wondering if you'll ever see these roads again, if the same clouds will drift over you once you're halfway across the ocean. They say the draft turned farmers into fighters overnight. Some historians argue whether the sudden flood of so many young men really balanced the scales of the war, or simply filled the gaps left by older soldiers worn down by endless campaigns. Still, that envelope was an equalizer college boys' factory hands, school teachers all sitting shoulder to shoulder in the induction hall, exchanging nervous jokes about haircuts and uniforms that never quite fit. A nurse jabs your arm with a vaccination needle while you eye the door, half wondering if you could slip out before the bandages and the boot polish arrive. One boy pockets his draft card like it's a souvenir. Another folds his, so small it disappears behind a cigarette pack. There's a peculiar detail they won't put in your history book. Many soldiers never threw theirs away, even after the war. Tucked in drawers, hidden in coat linings, tiny reminders of a moment when life bent sharply in a new direction. So you board the train at dawn, whistle blowing clouds of steam into a pale sky. The conductor calls for final goodbyes. You find your seat next to strangers who will soon know every secret you thought you'd keep to yourself. The countryside blurs past. The letter sits in your pocket, warm against your leg, humming with the promise of mud sweat and sleepless nights. You shuffle off that train, clutching a paper duffel and a head full of second guesses. By now, the draft card is buried deep in your pocket, creased and sweat-softened like a bad luck charm you can't quite toss away. Ahead, the training camp sprawls in gray rows of barracks, muddy fields, and a parade ground that smells faintly of scorched coffee and oil-soaked boots. They say the first morning hits hardest the bark of the drill sergeant before dawn, the thin blanket slipping off your bunk just as you drift into your only 5 minutes of real sleep. Some recruits swear they never truly slept again until they stepped off the boat years later, if they were lucky enough to step off at all. You stand in line for breakfast, that tastes like something your dog might politely decline. Powdered eggs, burnt toast, edges a mug of coffee so thin it's practically an insult. Someone behind you jokes that the coffee here could strip rust off the trucks they practice driving in endless circles. The man in front of you laughs too loud, a sound cracked by nerves. You memorize the sound. Later, you'll share a foxhole with him. Later, maybe you won't. They say boot camp shapes you. Some historians argue if that's true, or if it just breaks you down until the pieces fit the uniform better. Either way, you're about to learn how to run until your feet blister crawl through mud that smells faintly of diesel and stand so still under the sun that you'll forget how to fidget. You watch a drill sergeant stomp through the ranks, his voice cutting through the chill like a blunt knife. He barks about your posture, your mother's cooking, your lack of chin hair. He tells you you're soft. He promises you'll be harder by next week or else. There's a rumor that he once chewed out a private so thoroughly the poor kid forgot his own name. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's just barracks lore passed around to make the nights go faster. Between push-ups and lectures on how to salute without embarrassing the whole platoon, you catch glimpses of the world outside the wire fence. A line of trees, a farm tractor in the distance, a girl on a bicycle who doesn't even glance at the rows of khaki stumbling through formation drills. You hold those glimpses like secret candy sweet fleeting reminders that somewhere beyond this mud pit, normal life ticks on. Oddly enough, the camp becomes its own small world. The bunks smell like damp wool and anxious dreams. The latrines echo with bad jokes and worse smells. You learn to shower fast, or not at all. And you learn that sleep is a currency spent carefully snatched in 10-minute naps on stiff cots or stolen while pretending to listen to a lecture about the M1 rifle. Historians still debate whether these camps really forged heroes or just spat out survivors who happened to aim straight when it mattered. What's certain is that for a few endless weeks, you belong to a place where your name is stitched to your chest and your individuality dissolves into neat lines and shouted commands. One night, you lie awake staring at the rafters. Rain drums on the tin roof. You think of the draft card still hidden in your bag, still whispering your fate like a ghost you can't quite exorcise. You wonder if you'll ever get the mud out from under your fingernails. Morning comes early again. The sergeant's whistle shrieks. Boots hit the floor. Another day of drills, sour coffee, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll make it through. You wake up before the whistle this time, half dreaming of home and half cursing the cold floor waiting under your boots. The barracks hum with the rustle of uniforms pulled on in the dark, the quiet cursing when someone spills yesterday's coffee grounds onto a freshly cleaned kit. Outside, dawn slips across the parade ground, painting the mud a softer gray than it deserves. Breakfast is powdered eggs again, rubbery lumps you drown in watery ketchup just to taste something real. A cigarette flickers between the fingers of the boy across from you, his face pale under the flickering mess hall light. Rumors float like smoke rings above the metal trays, deployment dates, new training orders, whispers of who's shipping out first. Nobody says it outright, but every rumor feels like a ghost tapping at your shoulder, asking if you're ready to pack up your last clean pair of socks and say goodbye. They say the Army runs on coffee and gossip in equal measure. Some scholars argue that soldiers' morale was held together less by official briefings and more by these half-whispered tales swapped over stale smokes and cooling eggs. You cling to every story that promises a delay, an extra week, a missing shipment, a clerical error that keeps you stateside while the war rages an ocean away. You trade a cigarette for a rumor, a chocolate bar for a pack of letters someone swears they found under a bunk. You learn who's sweet on the girl back home, who keeps a picture tucked in their helmet liner, who writes letters they never intend to mail, love confessions, scribbled only to hear the scratch of pen on paper in a place where silence can swallow you whole. Once after lights out, you hear someone crying softly under the covers. You pretend to be asleep, eyes squeezed shut, against the knowledge that tomorrow, that same voice will crack jokes and brag about girls and shout over the clang of mess kits like nothing happened. Fear is private here, traded for bravado and daylight. There's a peculiar detail hidden in the footnotes of wartime letters, censors reading every line, blacking out anything too real, too revealing. A line about location vanishes under an inky box. A word about casualties disappears, like it never existed. Historians still puzzle over what secrets sank into those black marks, grief, regret, half-written warnings no mother would ever read. One morning, a corporal walks in, waving a fresh stack of papers, his grin sharp and a little too wide. Orders, he says, fresh off the typewriter. Rumors swirl faster than the steam off your tin mug. You swallow your last bite of scrambled mystery and drift outside to stand in formation boots, sinking into thawing mud. You feel the letter in your breast pocket, a half-finished note to your brother that you keep rewriting, never quite able to say what needs saying. Someone behind you mutters that the next stop is a port town, ships, waiting salt wind, ready to slap you awake in ways the sergeant's whistle never could. You wonder if the rumors are true about the seasickness, the U-boats, the endless horizon that looks more like a prison than a promise. The bugle calls, boots shuffle, someone coughs. You stand a little straighter, listening to the gossip swirl around you like cigarette smoke in a drafty barracks. Maybe half of it's lies. Maybe all of it's true. But for now, it's what keeps you sane, these crumbs of information traded for a stale biscuit or a borrowed lighter. Tomorrow, maybe you'll taste salt on the wind. For now, you flick your cigarette butt into the mud and watch it sink slowly, like a rumor, disappearing into the dark. The morning you leave camp, the world smells different, saltier somehow, as if the oceans already crept inland to claim you. The train that carried you into boot camp now rattles you toward the coast, your duffel bag bumping against your knee like a restless dog. Faces blur outside the window, farmers bent over fields, station clerks yawning at benches, children waving at a blur of khaki they don't yet understand. At the port, the troop ship looms like a floating factory, gray and monstrous against a bruised sky. You taste oil in the wind, catch a whiff of stale tobacco and engine grease. Somewhere deep in the hull, diesel engines hum like an uneasy lullaby. The line moves slowly, boots clomping up the gangway in sync with the soft hush of the tide below. You grip the railing and wonder if the water beneath you hides shadows with teeth. There's an old rumor that the Atlantic swallows soldiers before they ever see enemy soil. U-boats drifting mines, storms with no mercy. Some historians argue that the ocean claimed nearly as many lives as the battlefields. The debate never ends, just like the water stretching out to the edge of your imagination. Below deck, you claim a bunk, stacked 4 high. The metal frame shivers with each groan of the ship's hull. The man above you snores already, his duffel tucked under his head like a reluctant pillow. You roll to your side trying to find sleep among the rattling pipes and the stale air that tastes of sweat and steel. Meals are ladled out in metal trays by cooks who seem as seasick as everyone else. Powdered potatoes, watery gravy coffee that tastes even worse when mixed with the pitch and roll of the ship's belly. You learn to eat fast before the next wave tilts the world sideways and your appetite vanishes into the sway. At night, you lie in the dark and listen. Footsteps echo along steel gangways. Somewhere, someone retches into a bucket, curses softly, retches again. Above you, the deck creaks under the shuffle of boots. You imagine the cold spray of the Atlantic, just inches from your cheek, the wind howling against the metal shell that pretends to keep you safe. A peculiar detail floats through the bunk stories of ships sailing in zigzags to dodge U-boats of captains who sleep with a pistol under their pillow just in case. Some soldiers claim they saw a periscope trailing them at sunset. Others swear it's just shadows and nerves rumors birthed by the endless creak and sway. One night you squeeze through a hatchway onto the deck. The wind slaps your cheeks raw, but the sky is clear stars spilled like salt across black velvet. You grip the railing, feel the cold bite of salt spray on your knuckles. Somewhere out there, an enemy waits beneath the waves. Or maybe there's nothing at all but your own heartbeat loud in your ears. Historians still debate whether the crossing was the worst part or the easiest. Here, bobbing on black water, it's hard to tell the difference between dread and hope. Both taste the same sharp as the wind, heavy as the salt crusting your lips. Below deck, the bunks sway. Someone plays harmonica, off-key, but determined. Laughter bubbles up in short bursts, quiet as conspiracies. You tuck your draft card deeper into your kit bag as if paper alone might keep you afloat should the hull ever crack open. When sleep comes, it drifts in on the tide carrying whispers of home and the muffled promise that tomorrow you'll step off this ship onto foreign mud under foreign skies, your boots already damp with the ghosts of the ocean behind you. When the ship finally groans to a halt, it's not the blast of the horn or the bark of an officer that jolts you awake, it's the silence. For days, the Atlantic's constant moan of wind and engine has filled your ears. Now standing on deck, with your pack digging into your shoulders, you feel an eerie hush settle over the rows of men around you. Gangplanks clatter down. Boots shuffle forward, hesitant at first, then steady, with forced bravado. The air tastes foreign wet earth coal, smoke a sharp edge of salt clinging to your collar. You step off the ship and onto a dock slick with rain and footprints from those who landed hours before you. Some look back at the sea as if they half expect it to drag them home again. Most don't bother. You breathe in the mud, the unfamiliar accents barking orders through the fog. French port workers haul crates past your boots. A British officer waves a clipboard like a conductor, directing a grim symphony. You catch bits of languages you don't understand, quick words traded over crates of ammunition and sacks of potatoes. Even the mud smells different here, richer somehow, clinging to your boots as if it's determined to remind you where you are. Rumors trickle through the line. Some unit already marched inland, another lost a truck to a stray shell days ago. Historians argue whether these first days ashore shaped the soldiers more than any training ever could. Stepping onto a land you've never seen. Hearing artillery echo somewhere too close for comfort. Suddenly, the drills and shouted commands back at camp feel like childish games. A peculiar detail floats in. With the sea mist, some soldiers carve their names into dock posts or brick walls before moving on. Tiny markers, left behind, proof they stood here. Boots muddied, eyes wide, hearts hammering. Maybe it's bravado. Maybe it's fear, scratching its name into foreign stone. You shuffle forward, duffel bouncing on your hip. An officer points you toward a line of trucks' engines idling under a gray sky. You climb in with 20 other men, knees knocking together as the driver grinds the gears. The countryside rolls past a blur of hedgerows, crooked farmhouses, old stone walls patched with moss, and bullet holes from battles fought before you ever arrived. No one talks much on that ride inland. Words feel too loud, too fragile against the cold metal of the truck's sides. A boy next to you who still looks like he should be worrying about high school dances and Sunday dinners hums a tune under his breath. Off key, a lullaby for himself. You don't ask him to stop. They say the war waited for no one, but here, bumping down a narrow road flanked by wet fields, it feels like the war is holding its breath just for you. You spot a ruined barn, in the distance charred beams, a roof half collapsed. Someone taps your shoulder and mutters that you'll be sleeping in places like that soon enough. You nod. You don't ask what happened to whoever slept there last. Scholars still debate whether these first steps hardened men or simply peeled away the last soft layers they carried from home. Either way, the road keeps winding ahead, mud spattered across your boots. Rain drumming on the truck's canvas roof like a quiet countdown. When the convoy stops for the night, you hop down into mud that sucks at your soles. A sergeant points you toward a tent, already sagging under drizzle. You drop your bag, shoulders, aching hands raw from clutching cold metal and hope in equal measure. Sleep comes slow. Somewhere beyond the flap of your tent, artillery rumbles in the dark like distant thunder with teeth. You roll over, bury your face in your sleeve, and breathe in the damp fabric, foreign mud, foreign rain, but the same beating heart reminding you war doesn't wait for you to adjust. The first time you dig a foxhole, your shovel feels like an insult. The ground is frozen, packed harder than any field back home. Your fingers blister under thin gloves while your breath curls out in little ghosts that vanish before they reach your bunkmate's shoulder. Around you, men grunt and curse softly, the sound swallowed by the distant pop of artillery somewhere past the tree line. They told you back at camp that foxholes are lifelines, your coffin, or your shield, depending on who's telling the story. Some historians argue whether these shallow pits really saved lives or just gave soldiers a false sense of security while shells stitch the earth above. Still you dig because the cold night doesn't care about your doubts. A peculiar detail slips into the trenches alongside you old-timers swear by sprinkling coffee grounds at the bottom of a fresh hole. They say it masks your scent, keeps the dogs and rats at bay. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's just something to do with your hands, while your mind tries not to think about what happens if the next flare lights up your patch of ground. You press your back against the frozen earth rifle propped on your knee. Overhead, ghostly flares drift down, painting the battlefield in stark flashes of white and shadow. In that brief, unnatural daylight, every tree stump looks like an enemy helmet, every branch a creeping hand. Then darkness again, thick and absolute. Beside you, someone mutters a joke about home. You reply with half a laugh, half a shiver. Humor is a fragile shield here, but it's all you have. You trade jokes like cigarettes, short bitter smokes that burn fast and leave your throat raw, but your mind a little quieter. It's easier than silence, which leaves too much room for wondering if the next distant boom means they're aiming closer this time. You shift in your narrow burrow, feeling the cold seep through your uniform, gnawing at your bones. You listen to the ground more than the air. Sometimes you swear you can feel the vibrations before the sound arrives. A distant rumble, a soft hiss, the thud of something landing where you hope it never does. There's a quiet scholarly debate about the effect these nights had on the men who survived them. Some argue the foxhole turned them into ghosts. Before their time, hollow-eyed soldiers who learned to sleep with one ear open for footsteps, one hand curled around a weapon. Others say the hole was the only place they felt any control, a scrap of earth they could shape with their own hands when everything else fell apart. You wipe mud from your glove, tracing your name into the frozen wall next to your knee. It feels childish, almost tender, a tiny rebellion against a world that wants you anonymous, a name on a roster or a letter home. Around you, the whispers fade. Men drift into uneasy sleep boots, nudging each other in cramped trenches that snake through the brittle grass. An hour passes, maybe two. A flare pops again, painting your frozen name in harsh white light before it fades back into shadow. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the earth above you, the cold pressing close, as if it wants to crawl inside your bones and wait there for spring. In the morning, you'll crawl out stiff and blinking under a weak sun. But for now, you press deeper into your borrowed patch of dirt. Whisper one last joke to the man beside you, something about bad coffee and worse luck, and pretend you don't hear the distant artillery coughing a lullaby that never quite lets you sleep. Daylight creeps into the foxhole like an uninvited guest. You rub the frost from your helmet brim and check your pocket for the letter you folded and refolded until the paper feels more like cloth than words. It's meant for home, some warm kitchen, where the biggest worry should be burned toast or missing socks, not whether the next knock at the door carries the weight of a telegram. You find a moment between drills and watch rotations to scribble another line. I'm fine. Don't worry. You lie, of course. Everyone lies in these letters. There's an unspoken rule that the truth stays buried out here in the mud, far from mother's kitchen table or a sweetheart's trembling hands. Some historians argue whether these letters were more for the ones left behind or for the men clutching the pencil, pretending they were still whole enough to be missed. You borrow a stub of pencil from the boy across the trench. He's already scrawling his fourth letter this week. He says his mother won't sleep unless she sees his name in her mailbox every Thursday. He doesn't mention whether he believes she'll sleep any better, knowing nothing and everything all at once. A peculiar detail drifts through these scraps of paper. An envelope. Some soldiers sprinkle a drop of coffee on their pages or rub the paper on their uniform sleeve. Anything to leave behind a smell of campfire tobacco, the sharp, metallic tang of gun oil. Little proofs of life stitched into sentences that dance around the things they can't say outright. You fold your letter carefully, pressing the edges flat with cold fingertips. The ink smudges a little where your glove brushes it. There's no poetry here, just talk of the weather, the food, a half-made promise about coming home with stories you'll never actually tell. You seal the envelope, watch a corporal collect the bundle, and tuck them into a battered canvas bag that's seen more miles than most boots. Somewhere down the line, a censor's table waits men with black pens and tired eyes scanning each line for coordinates, stray details that might slip through and make their way to an enemy's eager ears. Historians still argue whether the censors protected secrets or simply smothered the truth under neat rectangles of missing words. Night falls again, with a sigh that settles into your bones. You listen to someone nearby, reading a letter aloud, soft words about a sister's wedding, a neighbor's new tractor, the cat that keeps sneaking scraps off the kitchen counter. It's a lullaby in a way, one that pulls you from the sharp edges of the trench and deposits you, if only for a minute, on a porch swing back home. When the reader's voice cracks, he laughs it off. Says the ink ran. Says the paper's cheap. Nobody calls him out on the lie. Instead, you pass him a half-smashed chocolate bar and pretend you're just cold, not thinking about your own letter, folded like a secret in the bottom of your pack. There's a line scratched into the timber above your bunk. Tell them you're fine. Maybe some ghost of a soldier wrote it. Maybe it was always there. Either way, it fits the shape of these words drifting back across oceans and train tracks, half-truths that bind you to somewhere you're not sure you'll see again. So you curl deeper into your coat, the letter's phantom weight against your chest. Outside, the wind snaps at the trench walls. Somewhere up the line, artillery coughs once twice, reminding you that this quiet moment is always borrowed time. And tomorrow, another letter, another lie, another promise, folded like armor against the cold. Morning slips in with the scent of burnt coffee and wet wool, and you find yourself sharing a tin mug with the same boy who lent you his pencil yesterday. His name barely matters anymore. Names get replaced with nicknames out here, Slim Red Preacher. Everyone's got one. Everyone wears someone else's story, like a second uniform. Beside you, a pack of chocolate bars appears traded under the table for a pack of stale cigarettes someone snagged off a supply truck. You break off a piece and pass it down the line. It's gritty, half-melted, but sweet enough to remind you there's still such a thing as sweetness. Preacher says it tastes like home. Slim says it tastes like his mother's Sunday cake, which always burned on the bottom, but no one dared mention it. They say war forges friendships in the strangest soil. Some historians argue these foxhole bonds run deeper than blood ties. Men learning more about each other in a single frozen night than they ever learned from brothers they left behind. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's just the cold and fear binding you tight enough to pretend you'll all see the other side together. A peculiar detail you wouldn't read in any letter home lice. They love these trenches as much as you hate them. Nights pass with the quiet scratching of collars and cuffs, the occasional muttered curse when someone finds an unwelcome passenger burrowed where warmth lingers. You trade jokes about it, frontline mascots, someone says. Better than rats, someone else adds, and everyone nods, like that's just how it is. Between the scratching and the chocolate swapping, you learn secrets. Who kissed whose sister before shipping out? Who once stole a teacher's whiskey and blamed it on the janitor? Who plans to open a diner back home with fried eggs bigger than your helmet and pie that makes you forget every cold dawn spent with boots in the mud? Now and then, a shell bursts far enough away to be a distant reminder, but close enough to hush the laughter. Conversations pause, eyes dart up at the tree line, and then, as if by unspoken pact, you pick up where you left off, talking about pie sisters, hometown movie theaters with sticky floors and warm seats. Somewhere in this stretch of frozen dirt, a tin of cocoa powder appears, liberated from a supply crate by someone who knows how to disappear into the dark and come back with treasures. You pass it around like a relic, dipping a finger to taste the dusty sweetness before the next man claims his share. For a moment, it's easy to forget the cold chewing at your fingertips. There's no scholarly consensus on whether these small luxuries mattered: bars of chocolate, a borrowed letter from a stranger's sweetheart, a tin of cocoa rationed out like gold dust. Some say it was everything. Others claim it was nothing more then a brief lie you told your stomach so your heart could keep pretending there was something waiting when the gunfire stopped. You lean back against the cold wall of your dugout, listening to Slim hum a tune that's mostly off-key and mostly forgotten. Maybe it was a church song once. Maybe it's just something he made up to fill the space. Either way, you let it wash over you like a lullaby, closing your eyes, feeling the bitter chocolate on your tongue, and the scratch of a louse under your collar, proof you're still here. In the morning, you'll scrape mud from your boots and your skin. Tonight, you trade secrets, share chocolate, and pretend the laughter echoing down the trench might last longer than the dark. By the time you see the enemy for the first time, you've run through 1,000 versions in your head. Shadowy shapes, in the dark, faceless helmets rising over a ridge. Figures glimpsed through the haze of rumor and whispered dread. But when you finally lift your rifle, squint down the cold barrel, and see a pair of eyes staring back at you across a field dusted with frost, the shape is all too human. The air tastes like iron cold sharp, and a little too clean for what's about to happen. Around you, boots scuff, frozen ground, breath clouds hang like ghosts above foxholes. Someone mutters a prayer, soft enough to vanish before it reaches your ear. Another man wipes a trembling hand on his sleeve, smearing grime across a patch that used to be white. Some historians argue whether training ever truly prepares you for this moment. They say drills and shouted orders mold you into a machine, one that pulls the trigger when the moment demands it. But there's always that heartbeat-long pause when the figure in your sight shifts from target to boy, no older than you knees, knocking in the snow behind a splintered fence post. A peculiar detail that never makes it into the brass briefings the enemy's just as scared. You catch a glimpse of his breath, clouding the air, his rifle trembling on the edge of a sandbag, his eyes flicking left and right like he's hoping someone else will shoot first so he can stay hidden behind a wall of smoke and orders. Someone beside you coughs. The noise cracks the frozen silence like a dropped shell casing. Fingers tighten on triggers. Somewhere a bird lifts off the bare branch of a blasted tree, startled by the sudden rustle of boots and breath. You press your cheek harder into the stock, feel the wood's cold bite against your skin. For a moment, your thumb hesitates on the safety. They don't tell you about that hesitation back at camp, the tiny second when the stories about heroes and glory slip through the gap in your helmet strap and drift away on the winter air. Some men fire, some don't. Some never speak of it again, burying that heartbeat of mercy deep enough that even the cold can't dig it back out. You squeeze the trigger, or maybe you don't. In the chaos that follows, you're never quite sure. The crack of rifles bounces off the trees, echoes through your boots, rattles your teeth. Smoke curls up from the barrel, a snake of burnt cordite and fear. The figure across the field drops, maybe ducking, maybe gone. You'll never know for certain, and you'll carry that question like a private medal long after the last shot's fired. Later, huddled behind a half-collapsed stone wall, you trade glances with the boy next to you. Preacher, or maybe Slim. It's hard to tell behind the grime, and the helmet pulled low over his eyes. He pulls a cigarette from a battered pack, lights it with fingers that won't stop trembling. He offers you a drag. The smoke settles in your lungs like a word you can't swallow. Somewhere back home, a mother stitches a quilt. A father turns off the radio when the news grows too heavy. Here the world shrinks to the patch of earth under your boots, the distant crack of rifles, the half smile you force onto your lips so you don't have to explain what you did or didn't do. Historians still puzzle over these moments, whether it was bravery or chance that pulled a man through. Whether the training ever truly aimed straight, or whether mercy and fear conspired to bend the barrel ever so slightly off course. You flick ash from the borrowed cigarette watch, it drift onto frozen mud. The enemy's still out there, figures in the dark, just as scared, just as cold, just as alive. The first time you see a medic at work up close, you wonder how anyone could ever call this war clean. One moment, you're crouched behind a splintered wall, boots squelching in mud, half frozen to your socks. The next, a shout splits the air, a voice you know raw, with pain that slices through the usual dull roar of gunfire like a bayonet through canvas. You scramble over boots slipping on ground, churned by boots and mortar. They're half sunk into a ditch is red. He's not shouting anymore. Just a quiet gasp every time the medic leans in, whispers soft nonsense words meant to tether him here a moment longer. They say battlefield medicine is part miracle, part madness. Some historians argue that what passed for first aid out here was just as deadly as any wound. Bandages washed in creek water, morphine rationed like gold dust tourniquets, tied tight enough to save a limb and sometimes take it instead. A peculiar detail you notice through the haze of your own breath. In the cold, the medic's helmet carries a faint smear of someone else's blood, dried to a rusty halo above the red cross. He works with steady hands, even as shells pop in the distance like cruel fireworks. He hums a tune under his breath, maybe a hymn, maybe some half-forgotten lullaby his mother sang, when he was no older than the kid bleeding into his lap now. You press your palm to Red's shoulder, not sure if you're helping or just pretending. His eyes flit open, meet yours, flick away again. Somewhere in that flicker sits an unspoken question, one you can't answer. So you squeeze his sleeve instead, as if your grip alone might pin his spirit to this patch of dirt. There's a moment, always, a moment when everything else fades. The shells, the gunfire, the reek of cordite and sweat. All that's left is the medic's voice. Hold still. Easy now. Just breathe. His hands move, like a magician's rummaging through a battered kit bag for bandages already stained with someone else's nightmare. You glimpse the glint of a needle, the curl of gauze that will never be white again. Somewhere nearby, another shout, another pair of boots slides past, dragging a limp figure behind a low wall. The medic doesn't look up. His world shrinks to Red's ragged breath, the artery pulsing beneath dirty fingertips, the morphine ampule clutched like a secret in a trembling hand. They say the medics carried more hope than morphine. Some survived only because they believed they could drag one more boy back from the brink with a handful of sulfa powder and a whispered prayer. Historians still debate whether it was skill luck or sheer stubbornness that saved more lives. A soft joke breaks the grim hush. The medic grins at Red says something about home coffee, waiting mother's stew, bubbling on a chipped stove back in a kitchen that never knew mud like this. Red tries to smile. You pretend you don't see the tears that slip from the corner of his eye, mingling with dirt and half-frozen blood. You sit there until the medic pats your shoulder, says he'll hold for now. Says it like it's a promise, and not just a wish pressed into a half-finished bandage. You help lift Red onto a stretcher, fashioned from canvas, and borrowed hope watching as he disappears into the shadows of the field station that smells of iodine and wet boots. Back behind the wall, your rifle waits cold against your palm. You press your forehead to the splintered wood, breathing in the sour tang of old smoke and fresh blood. There's no heroism here, just another chance to stand up, to aim straight, to hope your own breath doesn't catch in someone else's hands before dawn. They send you out under cover of dusk boots, crunching across frost-bitten fields that whisper secrets under every step. This is no frontline push with clear orders and shouting officers. No, this is the quiet work, the dangerous sliver of war that crawls into villages half swallowed by ruin, where every shuttered window might hold a friend or a barrel pointed at your spine. You move in pairs, slipping past burned-out barns and stone fences that remember centuries of old arguments long before this one. Local guides ghost ahead of you, men and women, wrapped in coats too thin for the cold eyes sharp as broken glass. They murmur directions in a language you don't know, tracing paths through orchards and half-collapsed churches where the wind rattles loose stained glass like teeth. Some historians argue that patrols behind enemy lines did more to break morale than artillery ever could. One man with the right map, a whispered word to a farmer who hates the invaders, just enough that's all it took to twist the knife deep into a war already bleeding at the edges. A peculiar detail flickers in your memory, an old woman in a village square who presses a slice of bread into your glove before vanishing into the shadows. No words. Just that soft gesture, a gift or maybe a bribe to keep her grandson's name out of your whispered reports. Tonight, your mission is simple on paper. Find the farmhouse. Confirm the uniform of whoever squats inside. Bring back news or proof, no more, no less. But paper never mentions the icy creek you wade through, boots filling with water that sucks the feeling from your toes until you wonder if they'll still be there when you look down. Beside you, Slim trudges in silence, his breath fogging around the muzzle of his rifle. He glances back now and then to check your shape against the trees. Two shadows among a forest that's seen so many shadows it barely notices anymore. When you reach the farmhouse, you crouch behind a crumbling stone wall. Through a crack, you glimpse figures hunched over a lantern. Enemy coats the dull glint of metal hands wrapped around steaming mugs. You catch the smell of something that might be stew, might be coffee, might be just your imagination, mocking your empty stomach. You press your cheek to the cold stone, watching, listening for a password you don't know. Somewhere under your glove, the draft card in your pocket twitches like a heartbeat, an echo of the boy who opened it in a warm kitchen a lifetime ago. There's a quiet, scholarly debate about whether these night patrols changed anything at all, whether the whispered names scribbled in field notebooks turned the tide or just stained more pages with secrets no one would ever read again. Slim nudges your shoulder points to the guide crouched at the barn door, 2 fingers, up, 1 down. It's time. You slip closer, breath catching on your teeth, boots silent in the frozen straw. Every step feels like a question. Whose friend? Whose foe? Who's just trying to stay warm by a stolen lantern in a war that eats good and bad in equal measure? Inside, a floorboard creaks. A match flares, then dies. Someone hums a lullaby, off-key, oblivious to the rifles waiting just beyond the doorframe. In that hush, you swear you hear your own heartbeat, louder than the wind outside. Then it's over, before it begins a signal tug on your sleeve, a retreat, back through the orchard boots, brushing frost from tangled roots. No shots fired tonight, just names memorized, a map sketched in a trembling hand, and a promise whispered in the dark. We'll be back before dawn. You follow the guide's lantern, bobbing ahead, your breath trailing behind you like a secret you'll never write down. Daylight in the Ardennes looks like something the sun forgot. Pale and half-hearted, it spills across a forest blanketed in snow so deep it swallows your boots and your curses both. You trudge forward anyway, shoulders hunched against a cold that seeps through every seam in your coat. Breath turns to frost on your collar. Fingers stiffen around your rifle stock until it feels more like an iron shackle than a weapon. They say the winter here is the Army's other enemy. Some historians argue that the bitter cold did more damage than any shell could frostbite, claiming toes, fingers, and the last scraps of hope in a soldier's chest. Others insist it was the cold that made men dig deeper, cling closer, build small fires hidden behind mounds of snow, just to feel human for another hour. You're learning that lesson firsthand as you stumble into your unit's makeshift camp, nestled between ancient pines, sagging under fresh powder. Tents flap miserably in the wind. Half-buried supply crates creak under the weight of frozen rations. Somewhere, a pot of thin soup bubbles over a stove no bigger than a helmet, steam rising into air so sharp it cuts through the smell of onions and powdered broth. A peculiar detail, the textbooks don't dwell on men huddled 2 or 3 to a foxhole boots pressed together for warmth, breath mingling in clouds that taste of stale cigarettes and canned beans. You share more than body heat. In these nights, you share secrets, half mumbled through chattering teeth, memories of warm porches, soft beds, a stove that never ran out of wood. You find Slim, crouched by the fire, his gloves off, rubbing cracked hands together, like he might summon spring from sheer stubbornness. He lifts his head when you approach, offers you the last spoonful of watery soup. You take it without protest. Your stomach's too numb to protest the taste anyway. They say the Ardennes was awaiting game trees, heavy with snow-masking tanks and soldiers alike. One moment, quiet enough to hear your heartbeat echo between branches. The next, a sudden roar of artillery splitting the silence apart like rotten timber. You never know which moment you're living until it's already passed. Somewhere in the tree line, a burst of laughter rings out, low, weary a joke told for the 1,000th time, just to prove that voices still work, that lungs can do more than cough in the cold. A pack of cards passes from glove to glove fingers, clumsy with frostbite, yet stubbornly shuffling aces and queens into hands that have no stakes left to bet. Historians still puzzle over how men endured this, how they dug trenches through frozen earth, hard as iron, how they wrapped rags around boots to stop toes from turning black. Some argue it was discipline, others say desperation. Maybe it was just the same stubborn spark that made them trade stories under the roar of distant gunfire. You crawl into your foxhole that night, beside Slim and Preacher, the 3 of you, packed tight as sardines under a torn blanket that smells like wood smoke and wet wool. The wind sneaks through every gap, stinging your eyes until tears freeze at the corner of your lashes. You close them anyway, listening to Preacher mumble a line from a hymn his grandmother taught him, something about warm fields and soft rains you can't quite picture anymore. Overhead, the pines groan under their snowy load. Now and then, a branch snaps, thudding into the drifts with a sound that makes everyone flinch, an echo of artillery, even when it's only winter's slow betrayal. You press your knees tighter to your chest, breathe into your collar, and tell yourself tomorrow the snow might thaw. Tomorrow the rations might come through. Tomorrow the cold might loosen its grip. Tomorrow, always tomorrow. When the official rations run thin, and they always do one way or another, you learn to trust your nose more than the supply sergeant's promises. Word drifts through the trees. like smoke someone's found crates abandoned in a half-collapsed barn. Not your crates, not your side's enemy rations left behind when the front line hiccuped and shifted overnight. You and Slim creep out at dusk, packs half-empty stomachs more so. The snow crunches underfoot, every step loud as a gunshot in the hush of the Ardennes. Somewhere ahead, the barn waits like a secret no one wants to share too widely. Too many mouths, and there'll be nothing left but splinters and dented tins. Inside, the place smells of wet hay and rust. You sweep your flashlight's thin beam across the clutter-battered helmets, a broken crate of boots boxes stamped with words you can't read, but your stomach understands perfectly well. Slim cracks one open with his bayonet. Inside, tins of sauerkraut, something pickled in brine, something else that looks suspiciously like dog food, but you'd eat it anyway if it stays down. They say hunger levels the playing field more than any uniform. Some historians argue that these strange, silent trades of food between enemies were as old as war itself. Soldiers sharing cigarettes across trenches, swapping chocolate for bread. Warmth, traded for a moment of mercy that no general ever authorized. A peculiar detail you can't help but smile at, scrawled on the inside of one lid, is a line of music notes, some bored conscript's idea of a joke maybe, or a piece of home wedged between stale cabbage and briny sausages. Slim hums a tune that might fit those notes. You pretend it doesn't make your throat tighten. Outside the barn, the frost bites harder now that your belly's teasing you with hope. You stuff tins into your pack until the straps creak. The next foxhole meal will be stranger than any mess hall stew. Enemy sauerkraut stewed with leftover biscuits, mystery meat mashed into cold bread. But it'll be food that slides warm down your throat, and that's all that matters tonight. Back at camp, you squat in a hollow behind a stand of pines. Slim passes you a dented tin. Preacher appears from the dark hands, jammed into his coat eyes wide, when he catches the scent drifting from your scavenged supper. You pass him a spoon, no questions asked. Hunger rewrites the rules no rank when there's stew to share. There's a moment when the steam rises and mixes with the fog of your breath, and for a heartbeat, the snow and the cold fade to the edges of your mind. You joke about opening a diner back home. Slim's sauerkraut. Surprise 50 cents a bowl bread, included if you smile nicely at the waitress. Preacher laughs so hard he nearly chokes on a mouthful of pickled something. They say small comforts keep men alive as much as warm boots or a dry blanket. Some scholars still debate whether it was camaraderie or calories that carried platoons through weeks where no official ration made it up the line. Maybe it was both spoons scraping dented tins. Laughter, huddled close enough to chase off the frost for a moment longer. When the meal's gone, you bury the empty tins under the snow, no evidence left for the quartermaster to scold over or the enemy to trace back in the dark. You wipe your spoon on your sleeve, pack it away like a talisman against tomorrow's hunger. In the distance, artillery growls faint tonight, like a dog barking from another village altogether. You pull your coat tighter, share the last crumb of stale chocolate from your pocket, and watch Slim hum that tune again, soft enough not to wake the ghosts drifting through the snow-heavy trees. When the echoes of gunfire fade and word trickles down the line, "It's over here, move on there," you find yourself walking through towns that once existed only as dots on a map, scribbled by someone who never saw them crumble. The liberation they promised in letters home doesn't look like parades and banners at first. It looks like empty windows and streets littered with bits of lives too heavy to carry away. Your boots crunch over broken cobblestones past doorways blasted clean of doors. Somewhere, a bent bicycle leans against a wall, sprayed with shrapnel scars. You step around, a child's wooden toy wheels, gone paint, flaking abandoned mid-play, when the world cracked open. You wonder if the child got out, if they're huddled in some other street you'll march through tomorrow. They say victory tastes sweet, but here, the air tastes of dust and unspoken questions. Some historians argue whether liberation was a celebration or just another shadow in a country that had already learned to fear both flags. The villagers come out slowly, faces pinched eyes, flitting from your uniform to the ground, to each other, back to you. Some smile, some don't. A cheer bubbles up, now and then, as if they're reminding themselves what relief should sound like. A peculiar detail catches your eye near a church where half the roof has caved in. A bouquet of wildflowers, tiny stubborn things, blooming in a crack of sunlit rubble. Someone placed them there bright against the soot and brick dust. You stand a moment longer than you mean to boots, shifting on broken stone, wondering who thought to lay something so soft in a place so hard. Slim shuffles up beside you, nudging your elbow with his rifle stock. He jerks his chin toward an old woman, standing by a shutter, torn half from its hinge. She offers you a loaf of bread, or what's left of it, hard as stone, wrapped in a cloth that might once have been white. You take it with a nod you hope looks like thanks, though you have no words in her tongue to shape it properly. Somewhere down the street, you hear a piano, a handful of shaky notes drifting through an open window with no glass left to rattle. Someone's found the keys still work, that music can slip through bullet holes without tearing. Preacher leans against a doorway, eyes closed, letting the sound brush the mud off his mind for half a heartbeat. Historians still puzzle over what victory really meant in towns like this. A line on a map that shifted overnight boots, that marched out just as new boots marched in. Flags swap names rewritten on dusty signposts, families peering through torn curtains to see if this time the strangers bring peace or just more orders shouted in a different accent. You move on, because that's what orders do. They push you from street to street, house to house, greeting ghosts in doorways, stepping over stories you'll never hear the end of. Sometimes a child waves, sometimes they don't. Sometimes a man stares at you with a look that says, "Be gone soon. Let us stitch ourselves quiet again." That night, you squat in a courtyard where weeds push through cracked tiles. Slim passes you a scrap of the old bread stale, but warm from his pocket. You chew it, slow eyes drifting to the stars, pricking the velvet dark above walls blown half to memory. They say you'll remember the cheers, but you know, you'll remember the empty rooms. More, the flowers in the rubble, the piano echoing off broken brick, the quiet way freedom settles like dust over a town that's learned not to trust sudden noise. In the morning, you'll march on boots, scuffing up the last crumbs of someone's old life. Victory's loudest song will always end in silence you can taste. The home you come back to doesn't look much like the one you left behind, though the front porch still creaks the same when you step on the loose board near the rail. Your boots feel heavier than they should, like they carried too many miles and never quite learned how to stop. The polite parade that greets you neighbors waving flags, a brass band stumbling through a march they learned in high school feels like something you're watching through a window. Smiles beam at you, hands clap your back, and you nod when someone shouts, "Welcome home," as if the word home hasn't been hollowed out and refilled with cold mud half-burnt letters and dreams of empty fields half a world away. Your mother fusses with your collar, tugging it straight the way she did when you were a boy. Her hands linger on your shoulders, longer than they should, like she's making sure the bones are all still there under the uniform. You force a grin that makes your cheeks ache worse than any frostbite ever did. They say soldiers slip back into civilian life like water into an old riverbed, but you know better. Some historians argue whether any man truly came back whole, whether the boy who opened that draft card ever really steps off the train when it rattles into the station. Maybe he stays behind, stitched into a foxhole folded between pages of a letter that never made it through the censor's ink. A peculiar detail you notice at dinner, your first night home. Your father says, "Grace," with his eyes shut, so tight. You wonder if he's praying. You'll forget everything you can't say out loud. The roast on the table smells like Sunday dinners used to. But when you bite down, the taste floats behind your tongue, like smoke there and not there all at once. You catch yourself scanning the yard through the window, after dusk, counting shadows by the old shed. Habit, that's all. Your brother cracks a joke about your jumpy feet, and you laugh too hard, loud enough to startle the cat asleep under your chair. You apologize to the cat. Nobody says a word about it. Some nights, you drift back to those strange friendships, Slim's humming under frosted trees. Preacher's soft hymns whispered through cracked lips, the rasp of your own breath, echoing off a foxhole wall that still holds your name scratched into frozen dirt. Historians still puzzle over how men carried those ghosts back to kitchens and front porches tucked away behind polite smiles and freshly pressed suits. A neighbor boy knocks on your door, eyes wide, wanting to hear what it was like over there. He waits for your story the way you once waited for the mail truck with your draft card sealed in its belly. You tell him about the train ride, about the food, about the parades. You don't tell him about the rifle sight locking on a face just like his, or the cold that gnawed your bones while artillery stitched holes through the trees above. You write letters, you never send paragraphs about mud, about powdered eggs, about a piano echoing off broken bricks in a town whose name your tongue still trips over. You burn them in the stove at dawn when the house is quiet, when the ghosts lean closer to listen. They say you came back. The truth is, you brought pieces home, mud in your boot, souls, ghost laughter folded in your coat pocket, scraps of rations and rumors tucked between ribs, where even sleep can't pry them loose. Tomorrow, you'll stand on that same porch wave at the milkman, like you never left nod at the paper boy who whistles your name with half-familiar cheer. But tonight, you lie back in the soft bed you once took for granted, listening to the house settle, feeling the quiet press against your chest. And somewhere out there, the distant echo of boots and snow still follows you home. And just beyond those quiet walls, another war hums along a different kind of march, not of boots, but of rivet guns and oil-stained gloves holding the world together while the echoes fade. There's an odd comfort in knowing that while the men went off to fight millions of women, Rosie's many sisters stayed behind to fight their own quiet war, with rivets, wrenches, and restless nights. They didn't wear uniforms of brass buttons and polished boots. Instead, they tied back hair with polka dot scarves, slipped calloused hands into oil-stained gloves, and welded steel wings in cavernous hangars that smelled of grease and grit. Somewhere between the clank of metal and the buzz of assembly lines, they built the bombers, tanks, and Liberty ships that carried a world's fragile hope. You wander past the guard at the gate. He barely glances up. There's a shift change, and a river of women flows past you, some young, some old, all wearing the same defiant look in their eyes. You catch snippets of chatter about pay raises, overbearing supervisors, and husbands' letters that smell of stale trench mud. A rivet gun thuds in the distance, steady, determined, almost like a heartbeat for the sleeping city outside. One historical fact stands out tonight. By 1943, over 6 million American women joined the industrial workforce, stepping into roles once considered unthinkable for the fairer sex. Some scholars remain puzzled by how quickly factories adapted to this seismic shift while still resisting equal pay for equal sweat. You pause beside a woman named Betty. She's tightening bolts on a bomber wing, a smear of oil on her cheek, like a metal no general could pin. She laughs when a friend calls her Rosie, but the real Rosie was never just one woman. She was every woman who traded her apron for a welding torch. There's a soft debate among historians about whether these jobs truly empowered women or simply used them as placeholders until the war was done. You notice the factory walls tremble a little every time a test engine roars to life. It's a reminder that these machines are more than metal. They're lifelines, promises that brothers might come home sooner. Nearby, someone's playing a battered radio. The Andrews sisters croon between the rattle of sheet metal. A half-finished lunch pail sits open on a workbench. A cold sandwich, an apple, a single lipstick tucked into the corner, like a small rebellion. You imagine how it feels when the shift ends at dawn. The same river of women slips back out under neon lights, shoulders aching hair, smelling of smoke and iron filings. They'll trade factory floors for grocery lines, ration books, and the long wait for telegrams that may or may not come. One woman brushes past you. She's humming to herself, boots scuffed, mind far away. Maybe she's dreaming of a husband's safe return. Or maybe she's dreaming of the day she doesn't have to punch a clock for half a man's wage. As you drift deeper into the clang and hum of Rosie's many sisters, you wonder, did they know they were changing history, rivet by rivet? Or did they just want to keep the lights on? The kids fed the world turning. Some questions are best left to dream about. There's something almost sacred about the hush of midnight when you slip through the back door of a sewing room that technically doesn't exist. In these hidden workshops, tiny rooms above storefronts, behind blackout curtains, in church basements that still smell faintly of hymnals, women bend over bolts of silk and canvas. Their fingers move like clock hands, never stopping, because somewhere over the ocean, a paratrooper's life depends on every perfect stitch. A sewing machine chatters but softly, so no curious passerby guesses what's happening behind these walls. You stand near the door and watch as a woman named Ruth threads her needle by the glow of a single bulb that flickers like a candle fighting the wind. She's tired. Her back aches from standing at the munitions plant all day. But parachutes won't sew themselves, and the war never sleeps. One solid fact drifts through this fabric of secrecy. Many of these clandestine sewing rooms ran unofficially at night, powered by neighborhood whispers and moonlight. Some historians still argue whether this hidden labor was the key reason so many pilots survived bailing out over enemy lines. There's a quirky truth here too. When silk was scarce, some sewing rooms patched parachutes with scraps of wedding dresses, curtains, even old prom gowns. If you look close enough, maybe you'll see a faint swirl of embroidery where a young girl's hem once brushed the floor at a high school dance. The room smells of ironed fabric and lukewarm tea. A kettle rattles on a hot plate by the window, its steam curling into the cold night. Someone mutters about ration books and missing buttons about the neighbor's boy who didn't come home. And still the needles whisper through the silk line after line. It's oddly intimate being here. You can almost feel the weight of these secret stitches, each one a wish, a prayer, a promise that maybe, just maybe, the chute will open when it matters most. A gust of wind rattles the window pane. A siren howls far off, a reminder that bombers cross these same skies. For a moment, Ruth pauses, needle midair. She closes her eyes, listens, then sighs when the siren fades. Back to work. Some scholars remain divided on how many of these midnight sewing rooms operated entirely off the books. Was it neighborhood patriotism? Quiet rebellion? A bit of both. The ledgers don't say. The fabric holds its own secrets. You watch a young girl, maybe 16, tie off a seam and tuck the finished chute into a stack by the door. She yawns wide enough to show a missing tooth, a casualty of too many skipped dinners to stretch a family's ration. Outside, the street is empty, but for the squeak of a bicycle chain. A volunteer courier will come by, toss the bundles into a cart, and pedal them off to the depot before dawn. No one will thank these women by name. No medals will be pinned to these sewing room walls. But somewhere over fields and forests, silk canopies will bloom like pale ghosts, proof that a mother's hands stitched hope into thin air. Before you slip away, you notice a scrap of paper pinned to the door. It reads, "Check every seam twice." Under the ink smudge is a faint lipstick kiss, someone's lucky charm maybe, or just a tired joke in a world that could use more of both. You step back into the night, the echo of needles clicking, still humming in your ears. And you wonder if you ever leapt from a burning plane, would you thank the midnight seamstress you never met? Maybe it's enough that she never asked for thanks in the first place. Dawn breaks somewhere beyond the canvas tent flaps. But here, near the front lines, time is measured not by sunrise but by how many lives can be stitched back together before the next stretcher arrives. You find yourself in the shadowed corner of a field hospital, the air heavy with antiseptic, and the low murmur of nurses swapping bandages for morphine drips. It's not a place for heroics or medals. This is the realm of unyielding calm, where women in crisp uniforms work miracles with gauze-steady hands and the stubborn belief that every pulse is worth saving. One nurse, her name's Evelyn, leans over a young soldier whose breath rattles like paper in the wind. She checks his bandage dabs at his fevered brow and hums a tune so softly that only he and the ghosts listening can hear. A fact floats through the haze. Over $59,000 American nurses served near combat zones during WWII, many of them closer to the fighting than they ever expected. Some scholars still debate whether they were protected enough. History's paperwork is thin when it comes to the courage scribbled between the lines. A sudden shout outside the tent. Another stretcher appears, boots dangling off one end, a crimson smear soaking through a torn blanket. Evelyn doesn't flinch. She just nods at an orderly and pulls fresh gloves from her pocket. Her calm is contagious, somewhere beyond the canvas artillery rumbles, but inside, the hush returns. In a corner, you spot a nurse boiling water in a dented kettle over a camp stove that hisses and sputters. Steam curls into the stale air, mixing with the faint reek of iodine and blood. Between dressing wounds and rationing morphine, these women scribble quick letters for soldiers too weak to hold a pen. Here's something oddly tender. Some nurses tuck tiny pressed flowers into those letters, wild daisies clover a scrap of green to remind the wounded that somewhere beyond the trenches, the world still blooms. The tent flaps stir as another nurse ducks in hair tucked under a cap that's lost its starch. She whispers something to Evelyn, and they trade a look that's equal parts worry and determination. No orders barked, no medals pinned, just a silent agreement. Do what you can for as long as you can. Researchers continue to debate whether these near-front hospitals blurred the line between combatants and caregivers. Many nurses worked within artillery range tending wounds by lamplight, while shells cracked the earth just beyond the canvas walls. Yet they stayed often longer than they should have, because walking away meant another stretcher with no one waiting. There's a quiet heroism here, wrapped in white aprons and sore backs. You notice how a nurse slips a letter into a soldier's pocket. His eyes flutter open just long enough to see her smile before sleep pulls him under. Maybe he dreams of home. Maybe he dreams of nothing at all. Either way, she moves on another patient waiting. A bottle rattles empty on a makeshift shelf. A pencil rolls off a clipboard and lands at your feet. Outside, the horizon glows with a dull fire that might be dawn, or might be shells lighting up the sky again. In this place, you realize the war isn't measured in bombs dropped or territory gained. It's counted in quiet moments when a nurse checks a pulse, replaces a blood-soaked bandage, squeezes a trembling hand. Before you slip away, Evelyn lifts her head and catches your gaze. For a heartbeat, you feel her fatigue, her stubborn hope, her unspoken promise. As long as there's breath, there's work to do. You step through the tent, flaps into the cold dawn, the canvas closing behind you with a soft sigh, like the world exhaling after another sleepless night. A door closes behind you with a soft click, and you find yourself in a room that hums, not with engines or the clatter of rivet guns, but with whispers and the rustle of paper. This is where secrets die quiet deaths in the hands of codebreakers, wrapped in cardigans and purpose. You glance around the decoding room, a former classroom, or maybe a drafty office borrowed from some forgotten college hall. Young women sit elbow-to-elbow, sleeves rolled up hair, pinned neatly back to keep it from tangling in typewriter keys and cipher wheels. A kettle rattles on a battered stove in the corner, the only warmth in a room thick with tension and tobacco smoke. One fact threads through this hush. At Bletchley Park alone, nearly 8,000 women worked to break enemy codes. Some typed, some sorted, some turned rotors on the Enigma machines that hummed like restless bees. Historians still debate how many breakthroughs were made by accident-sharp eyes, catching patterns that the machines missed entirely. You drift closer to a girl named Margaret. She's tracing her finger across a page covered in rows of numbers, lips moving silently as she tests a hunch. Her cardigan sleeve brushes an overflowing ashtray she doesn't notice. On her desk, a cold cup of tea, half a biscuit gone stale, a folded photograph of her brother in uniform. The air crackles with concentration. Every so often, someone gasps, tiny sharp, and a flurry of pencils scratch across fresh paper. A breakthrough. Or maybe a dead end. You'd think there would be cheering, but instead, there's only a breath, held a glance exchanged, then back to the ciphers. Some scholars remain puzzled by how these women sworn to silence under threat of imprisonment carried the weight of thousands of lives and never spoke a word even years after the war ended. Their secrets folded into marriage motherhood and the humdrum of peacetime. You catch a glimpse of a wall pinned with intercepted messages, lines of numbers, and half-decoded phrases that might save a convoy from a U-boat tomorrow, or never amount to anything at all. Margaret rubs her eyes, glances at her watch, and sighs. The radiator clanks to life, coughing warmth into the stale air. There's a quirky truth buried in the archives. Some of these code breakers learned to mimic enemy slang so well, they'd crack jokes in fake German while decoding real threats. Between the lines of danger, they found tiny islands of mischief, like slipping puns into reports that no one outside these rooms would ever read. A pencil snaps. A young woman tosses it aside and digs another from a tin marked "For Victory." She scrawls a note to the officer down the hall, folds it twice, seals it with wax. Secrets traveling by hand, mind to mind, across dusty corridors that smell faintly of mildew and chalk. The door opens, and a gust of cold air sneaks in, with a stern-faced supervisor. He drops a stack of fresh intercepts on the nearest desk, new puzzles to solve before dawn. No thank you. No medals. No mention of the lives their silent labor will save. Just more numbers. More ciphers. More whispers to untangle before the world wakes up. Margaret rubs the photograph on her desk as if to draw courage from the grin frozen in black and white. Her lips move again. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just the next pattern taking shape in her mind. Outside, the blackout curtains flutter against the window frame. Somewhere beyond them, the coded messages fly by radio waves, threats and orders bouncing through the night sky like invisible ghosts. And here, in this hush of cardigans and pencil shavings, young women catch them, decode them, and send them quietly to the men who fight on battlefields they'll never see. You step back into the shadows, the murmurs of the codebreakers following you like a soft chant. Secrets cracked secrets, kept secrets that changed the war, but never changed the women who kept them. Step away from the humming cipher machines, and you find your boots sinking into soil, cold, damp, stubborn, as the women digging their fingers into it before the frost sets in. This is the countryside now, miles from any front line, yet every trench here matters just as much. The land army's harvest isn't measured in medals or enemy lines pushed back. It's counted in sacks of potatoes, crates of eggs, barrels of milk carted off to feed a nation at war. You stand at the edge of a field as dawn peeks over a hedgerow, painting the frost silver. A girl in an oversized wool coat wipes her nose with the back of a muddy glove. Her name is Elsie, and she's traded the warmth of a town flat for boots that leak and fingernails forever rimmed in dirt. A fact plants itself here by the height of the Second World War. Over 200,000 British women served in the Women's Land Army. Some had never milked a cow or mended a fence before. Some left high heels behind for good swapping silk stockings for scratchy breeches and sunburned forearms. Elsie laughs when you ask if she misses lipstick. She snaps a carrot in half, pops the piece in her mouth, and shrugs. The cows don't care, she says, voice muffled. There's a stubborn pride in that grin soil under her teeth and all. Some scholars remain divided on whether these farm girls were seen as patriots or cheap labor. The official posters showed smiling women in crisp uniforms, hair neat as church lace. The truth was, boots that rubbed blisters raw sudden rain, that turned a tilled field to muck, and nights spent dozing on hay bales when the work outlasted the daylight. A tractor sputters past, belching smoke that tastes of rust and old oil. Elsie climbs aboard boots, slipping on the iron steps. She waves you closer, shouting over the rattle of the engine. Hop up. Then fields won't plow themselves. You sit beside her as the machine bumps along a crooked furrow. In the distance, a row of girls in mismatched scarves stoop to pull beets from stubborn earth. A kettle steams on a fence post, warming a tin mug they pass down the line. There's a curious note buried in wartime diaries. Some land girls left behind marriages and children for this back-breaking work. Not every farm girl was a fresh-faced debutante turned plow queen. Some were war widows, seeking wages freedom, or just the solitude of empty fields. Elsie kills the engine and hops down boots, squelching in the mud. She kneels to check a row of carrots fingers nimble despite the chill. She hums to herself, an old folk tune, older than the tractor behind her. The wind picks up, flapping her coat like a ragged flag. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows late to the dawn, but still insisting on his own parade. Elsie laughs again and tosses you a misshapen carrot. For your trouble, she says, winking. Researchers still argue whether the land army changed women's place in society, or just loaned them a pair of boots they'd soon be asked to return. The truth lies buried here, maybe under the same rows they planted, tended, and harvested by hand when there weren't enough farmhands left to do it. You look back as Elsie straightens up, wiping mud on her coat. She stands tall among the furrows, muddy cold, half smiling at the stubbornness of green things that refuse to die just because the world is at war. And as you step away, boots caked with earth, you wonder, did they plant seeds for crops alone, or something bigger that would outlast ration books and blackouts? For now, the answer waits in the soil, quiet, stubborn, patient. The clatter of boots on cold steel brings you to a place where the harvest's mud gives way to iron rails stretching into the blackout night. Here, you ride alongside the railroad queens, women who traded daylight for lanterns and the steady thrum of wheels carrying soldiers and secrets across a country stitched together by tracks. You stand on the open platform of a rattling carriage. The night air slices through your coat as sparks leap from the engine's smokestack, vanishing into the starless dark. Beside you, a young woman adjusts her cap, tucks a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and checks her pocket watch by the glow of a covered lamp. Her name is Mabel, and tonight she's the conductor of this midnight freight part supply line, part lifeline, for a war that eats coal as greedily as it does courage. One fact echoes down these rails. By the early 1940s, tens of thousands of women worked the trains, conductors, engineers, ticket agents, switch operators, keeping vital supplies, food and troops moving through blackout conditions designed to hide their rumbling cargo from enemy bombers. Some scholars still question how they learned so quickly to run routes in near darkness, memorizing schedules and signals by heart, when a single mistake could send a train hurtling into another under cover of night. Mabel raps her knuckles on the side of the coal tender, exchanging a grin with the fireman, a girl not much older than her face smeared with soot. Together, they coax the old engine up a slight incline, wheels shrieking like ghosts beneath the weight of crates marked ammo and medical. Inside the passenger car, you spot rows of soldiers, heads lolling against windows blacked out with thick cloth. Their young, half-awake boots, undone helmets, clutched like promises. In the corner, a railway steward, a woman with tired eyes, and a clipboard pours tea into chipped tin cups. Steam curls above the rattling benches, a tiny mercy against the draft that slips through every rattling seam of the car. There's a quirky footnote, buried in the railway women's memoirs. Some of them made up new station names if they had to stop unexpectedly at a secret siding. Can't have the enemy guessing where the guns are going, one wrote decades later. They spun false directions with the same steady calm they used to shoo drunk soldiers off wrong platforms. A lantern swings overhead as the train rounds a bend. Mabel pulls a leather strap to signal the engineer 2 short tugs for slow ahead. She checks her watch again, lips moving in a whisper. Maybe she's reciting the next station. Maybe she's praying for the blackout curtains to hold if enemy bombers sniff the heat of the locomotive below. Researchers debate whether these railroad queens were ever truly thanked for risking collision derailment, or worse, in a war that preferred its heroines hidden. When peace came, many were told to step aside, hand the signal flags back to men who'd been busy fighting elsewhere. But tonight, you're here on the platform beside Mabel. The wind snatches your breath as the train plunges through an abandoned station, a flicker of brick walls, boarded windows, a stray dog startled by the roar of steel. No lights greet you, only the endless rail stretching forward, like a promise that tomorrow's dawn will still arrive on time. Mabel glances at you, eyes bright beneath the brim of her cap. She doesn't say much, just a nod, a half smile, and then she's leaning out the door again, lantern swinging as signals flick past in the dark. Behind you, the soldiers stir in their bunks' boots, scuffing metal floors. Ahead, the rails hum under the weight of everything this war needs moved before morning rations letters rifles hope. And at the center of it all, women like Mabel, riding the night rails with steady hands and a pocket watch ticking down the hours till dawn, slip quietly from the clatter of iron wheels to the soft hush of a Paris cafe, where secrets pass from gloved hands to coat pockets under the gentle rattle of porcelain cups. Here, among flower stalls and bakeries that mask the scent of fear with warm baguettes, you find the women whose courage came wrapped in silk stockings and coded phrases, female spies in Paris balancing death on a whisper. A bell above the cafe door jingles as you step inside. It's warm, a welcome change from the cold drizzle outside that turns the cobblestones slick and treacherous. You spot her immediately, a woman in a dark beret lipstick, precise eyes, scanning the street through the window's fogged glass. Her name tonight is Claudine, though it won't be tomorrow. One fact flickers beneath the table. Hundreds of women served as couriers, code runners, and double agents in Nazi-occupied Paris. Some were locals who knew every back alley by heart. Others parachuted in under moonlight, landing in orchard fields before slipping into the city like ghosts. Historians still argue over how many missions truly succeeded, the paper trails lost in fires, secret arrests, or double crosses whispered behind locked doors. Claudine sips her espresso fingers, drumming on the table in a rhythm only she knows. Under her glove, a scrap of paper is folded tight against her palm, an address, a time, a signal that tonight someone will vanish into the night, or someone else won't come home at all. Nearby, a florist fusses with a bouquet in the cafe window. Roses hide a message wrapped in oilskin, nothing more than 5 words, yet enough to reroute a shipment of weapons or warn a cell to scatter before the Gestapo kicks in a door. There's a curious piece of trivia buried in old memoirs. Some spies carried cyanide capsules tucked in the lining of their purses, an exit strategy more reliable than any promise from headquarters. It was said you could always spot the bravest ones by the way they lingered over pastries, as if every sweet bite might be the last. Claudine lifts her gaze and catches yours for a moment. You wonder if she sees you, really sees you, or just another shadow drifting past. She adjusts her beret stands and leaves a few francs under the saucer. The door jingles as she slips into the drizzle umbrella, snapping open to shield her face from watchful eyes. Some scholars remain divided over whether these women were expendable, celebrated, or forgotten on purpose. Their bravery lived and died in alleys and safe houses left behind in code books that crumbled to ash when the tide of liberation finally swept the city clean. You follow Claudine at a distance. She moves through Paris like she owns the night, pausing by a newsstand, nodding at a street sweeper, slipping a folded note into a young boy's pocket as he delivers baguettes door to door. Somewhere overhead, a blackout lamp flickers, casting her shadow across a brick wall, plastered with enemy posters. In a dim side street, she ducks into a flower shop, the smell of lilies and damp earth mixing with the faint trace of gun oil from a revolver tucked in her coat lining. A florist's apron brushes your sleeve as you wait in the corner. He's no florist at all, but tonight he'll sell tulips and trade secrets for freedom. A soft cough, a coded phrase about the weather, a nod. The message changes hands. Outside, the drizzle thickens into rain, muffling the sound of boots that search for traders, but rarely catch them in time. As you watch Claudine melt back into the city's maze of alleys and shuttered bakeries, you wonder what price she'll pay if tonight's words slip from the shadows into the wrong ears. But for now, she disappears into the night, a wisp of perfume, a flicker of courage, and a secret the rain can't wash away. Step away from the hush of Paris streets and slip inside a building where the air is heavy with sulfur and sweat. A munitions factory that hums like a beehive, only this hive buzzes with danger, waiting to ignite at the flick of a spark. Here, the women don't wear silk scarves or lipstick, not that it would last a minute in this place. They wear smudged aprons and headscarves knotted tight to keep stray hairs from catching in the gears. You stand near the entrance booths, slick with grit, and watch them file past you, each carrying a quiet understanding that any slip of the hand might mean the last breath they take. One solid fact grips you by the collar. During World War II, hundreds of thousands of women filled shells with TNT mixed powders, packed fuses. Many worked with chemicals so toxic their skin turned yellow, a haunting detail that earned them the nickname Canary Girls. Some scholars remain puzzled by how governments balance the need for ammunition with the rising tide of factory accidents hushed up in official reports. You trail behind a girl named Nora, who wipes her forehead with the back of her gloved hand before plunging it back into a barrel of cordite. Her sleeves are rolled high arms, speckled with burns that will fade eventually if she's lucky. A supervisor barks something about quotas. The women exchange tired glances, but keep moving funneling powder into brass casings that line up on the conveyor like obedient soldiers waiting to explode. Overhead skylights are painted black to hide the glow of the night shift. From enemy bombers, a single beam of moonlight could mean the factory becomes a target, and every crate of shells a candle to light up the dark. There's a quirky fact hidden in the yellowed pages of old letters. Some of these women smuggled love notes and jokes into shell casings, tiny scraps of rebellion that rattled across the front lines. A secret giggle hidden inside a bomb, a reminder that even in a place where everything could blow apart, laughter found its hiding spots. You move down the line. The hiss of steam, the clang of metal, the slap of boots on concrete, each sound layered atop the other, until your ears ring with the weight of it all. Nora glances at you, her eyes red from chemical fumes, but she grins anyway. She shouts above the roar. You get used to it mostly. A crate drops onto the floor with a thunderous thud. Everyone freezes for half a breath. No spark, no bang. Then the hum resumes louder somehow, as if daring the building to prove its danger. Researchers debate how many of these factory accidents were preventable, how many lives could have been saved If only the war machine hadn't needed so many bombs so quickly. The official records remain quiet, carefully redacted pages that can't blot out the echoes of sudden bangs that never made the newsreels. You pause at the far end of the factory floor. There, under a flickering lamp, women sort defective shells into a pile marked reject. One cracks a joke about shipping them back to Hitler gift-wrapped. A burst of laughter, nervous sharp. Then the line moves again. Outside, a blast of winter air leaks through a broken window pane, mixing with the hot metallic breath of the factory. Nora wipes her nose on her sleeve, adjusts her scarf, and keeps working shoulders squared against the knowledge that the same shells she loads tonight might change a battle she'll never see. As you turn to leave, the clang of hammers and the hiss of steam echo behind you like a heartbeat. You wonder what dreams the Canary girls carried home when dawn found them yellowed, exhausted, and still alive. Maybe that was enough surviving one shift to face the next sparks and all. Step out of the sulfur haze and follow the faint scratch of pen on paper, where danger gives way to longing and explosions are replaced by the rustle of envelopes passed from hand to hopeful hand. Here, you find the mail call angels women, sorting the lifelines that stitch lonely soldiers to home one letter at a time. You slip into a makeshift post hut, its wooden walls shivering in the winter wind that slips through every knot and crack. Inside, the warmth comes not from stoves. There are none, but from the flurry of voices, the laughter that bubbles up, despite frostbitten fingers and endless stacks of handwritten hope. A woman with ink-smudged knuckles named Martha tonight leans over a mountain of envelopes. Her hair is pinned back beneath a knitted cap that never quite stays in place. She hums an old hymn under her breath as she sorts a stack marked North Africa. Somewhere in that pile is a birthday card that took 3 months to cross an ocean, already outdated yet priceless, to the man who'll open it under desert stars. A solid fact glows here. By the height of the war, more than 2 billion letters moved through military mail systems each year. Behind every neat stack stood women who spent night after night decoding addresses, scrawled by hurried hands, translating bad handwriting into warm reminders that someone remembered you still existed. Some scholars remain puzzled by how these so-called mail angels kept the lifelines flowing when sabotage, censorship, and supply chains threatened to snarl every word in red tape. Martha lifts a letter to her nose. It smells faintly of perfume, a wife's sly rebellion, or maybe a sweetheart's promise that somewhere far from gunfire, normal life still waits. She grins, tucks it into the right bin, and moves on. A quirky detail lives in the footnotes. Many mail sorters, tucked in tiny extra stickers, pressed petals, a scribbled joke on scrap paper, hoping to make a stranger's night a little softer. Some soldiers kept these secret notes tucked in helmet linings or stitched into pockets like charms against the cold, the boredom, the bullets. A burst of wind rattles the door open. Snow flurries whirl inside before Martha kicks it shut with her boot. She rubs her hands together, breathes warmth into her gloves, and dives back into the stacks. You stand by the window and watch as another woman frowns over a torn envelope. She carefully smooths the flap, tapes it shut, and whispers, "Stay whole," as if her words might hold it together for one more mile. Somewhere outside this drafty hut, artillery rumbles like a distant storm, but inside, the air is alive with the soft thud of rubber stamps, the rustle of sacks being tied shut, the creak of floorboards under boots that have been here too long. Researchers still debate whether the power of these letters truly shaped morale, or if it was more myth than measurable fact. But when you see the grin that flickers across Martha's face as she slides a mother's letter into a bag bound for Italy, you suspect the answer lives in each soldier's coat pocket, folded and unfolded 100 times until the paper tears at the creases. Martha glances at you, eyes bleary but bright. She doesn't speak. There's no time for chatter when a train waits at dawn, and half the world's longing needs sorting before sunrise. Outside, the wind howls again. Inside, the women lean in close to the hurricane lamps, ink dancing under their fingers. In the quiet between gusts, you hear 1,000 heartbeats stitched together by postage stamps sealing wax, and the promise that words can cross oceans when bodies can't. And as you step back into the snow, you carry the faint smell of ink and candle smoke, the ghost of words that will find their way home thanks to the quiet angels no one ever sent a thank you letter to in return, slip from the drifting snow and the rustle of paper into a parlor thick with silence and the scent of stale tea. Hear the echoes of telegrams and folded flags settle heavy on the shoulders of those left behind widows who organize not for glory or pay, but because grief alone cannot keep a household warm. You stand at the threshold of a modest town hall, its windows rattling in the winter wind. Inside, a group of women sit elbow to elbow around a battered oak table. No uniforms here, no shiny pins, just threadbare coats, knitted shawls, and hands that grip mugs of watery tea, like it's the only warmth in the world. A soft fact flickers in the hush. After the telegrams arrived, those dreaded slips of paper, carried by trembling postmen, many widows gathered in small circles to share sorrow and survival. They formed volunteer brigades, sewing circles, turned lifelines, small funds pooled from spare coins to buy milk for fatherless babies, or coal for houses gone cold. Some scholars still argue whether these gatherings were born of desperation alone, or if they planted the seeds for post-war activism that would ripple forward for decades. One woman, Margaret, lifts her head when you step closer. Her eyes are rimmed red, but steady as she counts coins into a battered biscuit tin marked Widow's Fund. A name muttered an address, noted another widow's rent, paid another child's shoes, bought secondhand from the charity shop. A quirky detail clings to these stories like lint to wool. Many of these women became so skilled at rationing, bartering, and community organizing that local officials quietly leaned on them to manage shortages. Some even learned to forge signatures when bureaucracy got in the way. One more unrecorded rebellion by those who'd lost the right to wait politely for help. The room hums with soft conversation, low voices comparing telegram dates, gossip about a neighbor who finally found work at the depot, whispered prayers for sons still fighting on distant soil. A kettle hisses on a single ring stove in the corner, its chipped enamel mottled by years of use. Margaret passes the tin to her left, another widow hair, pinned back tight, counts the coins again. No room for mistakes when every penny might mean a night with the lights on. She scribbles a note into a ledger, so worn its spine has given up pages stitched together with scraps of ribbon. Researchers continue to debate how much power these quiet gatherings really wielded. Were they the spark for women's post-war unions? Or did they fade back into the silence of kitchens and laundries when the men returned? The truth perhaps lives somewhere in these minutes, where grief and grit meet under flickering gaslights. Near the window, a small boy dozes on a pile of coats, thumb tucked into his mouth. He stirs when the kettle whistles. Someone hushes him back to sleep with a promise of biscuits that don't exist yet, but might tomorrow if the committee's new idea for a bake sale brings in enough spare coins. Margaret sets her pencil down, rubs the bridge of her nose, and sighs a sound that's half exhaustion, half defiance. She catches your eye and offers the faintest smile, one that says, "Yes, we'll manage." Somehow. Outside, the wind rattles the panes again, but inside the walls, hold steady. This place, this borrowed room, smelling faintly of soap and cold ashes, brims with quiet revolutions. No parades, no medals, just a promise that life will keep moving forward on tea coins and the stubborn hearts of women who refuse to disappear. You slip out the door into the evening air, the hush of voices fading behind you. Somewhere inside, another widow leans over the table pen, scratching paper stitching hope together out of loss and small change. And for tonight at least, it's enough to hold back the dark. Slip away from the parlor's hushed whispers and find yourself back on a factory floor where the clang of metal drowns out polite talk of sacrifice and grief. Here, Rosie's riveting paycheck echoes louder than any speech, a stubborn reminder that patriotism doesn't always pay the bills equally, no matter how many rivets hold the wings together. You stand near a row of women, perched high on scaffolds, welding torches, flickering like tiny suns against the steel skeleton of an airplane. Sparks fall like orange fireflies onto the concrete below, dancing at their feet as they lean into the roar of industry. Meet Doris. She doesn't look up when you approach. Her welding mask hides a grin as bright as the arc she coaxes from steel and flame. She's been at this for 12 hours straight, pausing only to shove back her sleeve and check the pay stub folded neatly into her shirt pocket, a slip of paper that buys bread milk, maybe a new pair of work boots if she's lucky. One fact rivets itself to this scene. By 1944, women made up over a third of the U.S. aircraft industry's workforce. They turned out planes, tanks, and ships at a pace that stunned the very men who doubted they could handle the work. Yet on average, they earned barely half a man's wage for the same backbreaking shifts. Historians still debate whether wartime necessity or post-war backlash did more to bury their demands for equal pay once the last rivet was hammered home. A supervisor barks an order from below clipboard in hand pencil tucked behind his ear like a general's baton. Doris gives him a lazy salute when he's not looking a private rebellion that won't change her paycheck, but feels good anyway. Nearby, a group of women crowd around a battered bulletin board pinned with yellowed notices. One flyer demands fair wages for equal war work. Another lists names of women fired for unladylike conduct, which mostly means they spoke up about overtime or dared to mention the word union too loudly during break. There's a quirky truth tucked into the break room walls. Some women scribbled poems and jokes on the backs of pay stubs, leaving them stuffed inside locker doors for whoever needed a laugh. If you can't buy lipstick with it, might as well buy trouble, one scrap reads in faded pencil. Doris lifts her mask, sweat streaking her brow like war paint. She glances at you, eyes sharp under the harsh lights. "Heard they're hiring the men back soon," she says, voice flat. "Suppose they'll want this seat back too." She shrugs, raises her torch, and sends another shower of sparks cascading down the scaffold. Some scholars remain puzzled by how quickly the rosy image, bright smile bandana flexed arm became an icon, while the real Rosies went home with pink slips and half-earned pensions. The posters stayed. The pay raises didn't. A bell clangs somewhere overhead, signaling the end of shift. Boots clang down ladders, lunch pails slam shut. Doris flips her mask up. One last time, stares at the pay window across the hangar. She laughs a dry sound that bounces off the steel walls. As the women file out, you catch snippets of chatter, talk of rent, do children's shoes, worn thin a union meeting whispered about in a corner booth at the diner down the road. Tomorrow they'll be back on the scaffold rivet guns, singing like mechanical cicadas, dreams tucked into coat pockets alongside the pay stub that never quite covers all the bills. Outside dusk spills across the yard, smudging the sky with factory smoke and the hum of late shifts clocking in. Doris pauses at the gate, checks her watch, and slips her pay stub into her breast pocket like a talisman against the uncertain future waiting on the other side of the picket fence. If you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of each rivet hammered home a quiet demand for worth fair pay and a seat they weren't so willing to surrender after all. Drift away from the clang of steel and slip onto an airfield where the scent of burning fuel mixes with something sweeter, coffee-fried dough, and the laughter of women who serve warmth from battered tin trays. Here stand the Red Cross donut girls, rolling out comfort by the dozen for soldiers who crave a taste of home more than the rattle of metals. You find yourself near a squat mobile canteen truck, its sides painted with cheery slogans that flake in the sun and wind. Inside, a half-dozen women bustle around trays piled high with fresh donuts, though fresh might be generous when flour is rationed and oil is reused until it's little more than blackened memory. Meet Ruthie sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tucked under a kerchief that can't quite contain the flyaways sticking to her forehead. She balances a steaming mug in one hand and a tray of sugared rings in the other. She's been awake since dawn, flipping dough in a pot that splatters grease onto her apron like battle scars. She'll wash out later if she can find enough soap. One solid fact sweetens this chilly air. By the end of WWII, more than $7,000 Red Cross women served up hot coffee and donuts to soldiers at frontline airfields, bases, and hospitals. Historians still debate whether the donut was just a snack or a carefully crafted morale tool. One more edible reminder that somewhere beyond the horizon, a kitchen light still burns for them. A group of soldiers gathers by the truck helmets, cocked back boots caked in mud. They grin at Ruthie as she drops donuts into napkins that dissolve in the first gust of wind. One young man tries to pay. She waves him off with a flick of her wrist and an exasperated laugh. A quirky note lingers in the history books. Some donut girls carried recipe cards tucked in their pockets, handed down like secret weapons for winning hearts on muddy airstrips. A pinch more sugar here, a splash of condensed milk. They're just enough to make a soldier close his eyes, and for one bite, remember a mother's kitchen. Steam rises from the battered coffee urn as Ruthie tips it over each tin cup, the aroma battling the bite of diesel exhaust and distant thunder from the runway. Somewhere overhead, bombers line up like iron geese wings, braced for a mission that might not see them back before dawn. The soldiers drift closer to the truck boots, scuffing the wet earth as they lean in for a scrap of sweetness and a few stolen jokes. Home front's best front, Ruthie quips when one compliments her lopsided donuts. Another man teases her for burning the first batch she fires back, that he can roll his own if he's so fussy. Some scholars remain puzzled at the enduring affection these women inspired. They weren't nurses, spies, or soldiers. They carried no rifles, cracked, no codes. Yet the comfort of dough and caffeine stitched itself into the mythology of the war effort, a soft promise that no matter how far you drift, someone's waiting with a warm cup and a crooked smile. Ruthie wipes her hands on her apron, steps down from the truck's back step to light a cigarette someone hands her. She cups the flame, shielding it from the wind, and looks out across the field as engines rumble to life. Maybe she wonders if the boy who just took 2 extra donuts will return for a third tomorrow. Maybe she's already counting how much flour she'll have left to roll out the next batch. As the soldiers shuffle away, crumbs dotting their jackets like tiny medals, Ruthie tosses the last cold ring to a stray dog sniffing near the truck. She grins, shrugs, and ducks back inside to scrub the pot for another dawn that will surely come too soon. And you step away, the taste of sugar lingering on your tongue, a small comfort drifting with you into the waiting dark. Slip from the warmth of the donut truck back into the hush of an office corridor, where the walls echo with the click of typewriter keys and the faint scrape of heels crossing a waxed floor. The war is ending, or so they say, and the women who welded ships, rolled dough, and cracked codes now stand in neat lines, waiting for pink slips that spell out a different kind of quiet defeat. Here you find yourself beside an open door marked Personnel. Inside, a man with a pencil mustache leans over a desk cluttered with forms, his sleeves crisp, while the line outside drifts forward one soft sigh at a time. Each woman steps in signs. Her name nods at words like termination and reassignment, then steps back into a world that insists the best place for her is back at the stove or behind a shop counter. Meet Hattie. She tugs her coat tighter around her shoulders as she shuffles forward. The ink on her overalls hasn't even faded yet from the shipyard, where she bolted hull plates and laughed with Rosie's other sisters under clouds of sparks. Now she stands here, calloused hands tucked into pockets that will be empty soon enough. One hard fact flickers in the stale air. In 1945 alone, millions of women were dismissed from wartime jobs almost overnight. The factories switched from bombers to washing machines, from tanks to shiny new cars, and the posters that once begged women to join up quietly vanished from bus stops and factory walls. Historians still argue whether this abrupt return to normal stoked the embers for a different revolution that would flare 2 decades later in office towers and picket lines. Hattie steps into the room. The man behind the desk barely looks at her as he slides a paper forward, pointing at the dotted line, like it's the answer to everything she did for the war effort. She signs. What else is there to do? The pen scratches, the carbon paper squeaks. Somewhere in a metal trash can, scraps of old posters curl and blacken slogans about fighting together, building together. Together doesn't pay rent when the rivet gun is gone. A quirky truth hides between the typewriter keys. Some women scribbled protest notes onto the backs of their pink slips, tucked them into locker doors, or folded them into lunch pails for the next shift to find. Thanks for nothing, one read in looping pencil. We built your bombers. We can build the rest too. Hattie slips her paper into her handbag, cheap leather, cracked from too many rainy mornings waiting at the bus stop. Outside, the hall smells faintly of floor polish and the perfume of someone trying to wear dignity like armor. A young girl behind her shifts from foot to foot, studying the older women ahead of her with wide eyes. She never knew another kind of work, came straight from school. To the factory floor, learned to wield a torch before she learned to iron a blouse. Now she'll trade a welding mask for an apron she never asked for. Researchers still debate whether companies truly wanted to shove women out, or if the war machine simply didn't know what to do with a workforce that had tasted new freedom, new wages, new possibilities. The memos say, return to traditional roles, but the stories say, not everyone went quietly. Hattie steps back out into the cold street, the paper folded like a bad joke in her pocket. She pauses at a shop window. eyes the mannequins in neat dresses, imagines herself behind a counter, or at home sleeves, rolled up for chores instead of welding seams. A sign above the display reads, "Welcome home heroes." She snorts at that, adjusts her scarf, and keeps walking. As you watch her disappear into the crowd, shoulders squared, pace steady, you wonder if this end is truly an end, or simply the soft rattle of something new waiting to ignite behind all those politely closed doors. Slip away from the echo of closing doors and find yourself in a small public library where the air hums with the quiet scratch of pencils and the whisper of yellowed pages, turned one careful sheet at a time. Here, the oral histories, unearthed lie, waiting not in bold headlines or museum plaques, but tucked between faded diaries and cassette tapes, labeled in neat looping cursive. You stand by a wooden table that smells faintly of dust and lemon polish. Spread across its surface are notebooks bound with string edges frayed by decades of attic air. A woman named Marion sits hunched over a tape player, headphones too big for her small head eyes closed, as she transcribes the voice of a girl who once packed munitions by night and stitched parachutes by day. A fact flickers between the crackle of the old tape. Thousands of women told their wartime stories late in life, when children grown and jobs long behind them made space for truths they'd carried alone. Some scholars still argue whether these oral histories reshape the official records or simply haunt the footnotes reminders that the loudest echoes of war are often found in the quiet corners no one thought to ask about before. Marion pauses the tape fingers, tapping the worn keys of an old typewriter that rattles like loose coins in a tin can. She leans closer, squints at a line, rewinds a second or two, and smiles when the voice on the tape mutters a joke about falling asleep at the sewing machine and dreaming of silk shoots blooming in the sky. There's a quirky note hidden in these recordings. Some women slipped secrets into the microphone, as if confessing to an old friend how they hid lipstick in toolboxes, fell in love with other women at the factory, or smoked cigarettes in broom closets when supervisors weren't looking. Small rebellions that never made the newsreels or the training films, yet feel as real as the smudged fingerprints on these pages. You drift down a narrow aisle lined with shelves that sag under the weight of forgotten memoirs. The smell of ink-brittle paper and faint mold curls around you like an old blanket. A volunteer pushes a cart past its wheels, squeaking a lullaby for the memories stacked high on top shoeboxes, filled with snapshots of women leaning against tractors, factory gates, soup kitchen counters. Somewhere overhead, a fluorescent bulb flickers in protest. Marion lifts her head, rubs her temples, then clicks the player back on. The voice resumes raspy, now laughter bleeding through. A story about tricking the foreman into giving the night crew an extra hour of pay by misreading the punch clock. A soft rebellion that bought one more bag of sugar when ration books said no. Researchers debate whether these personal scraps shift the grand narrative or if they simply decorate its edges with honest fringe. But you hear it clearly, a secret history stitched into borrowed microphones, loose pages, and half-finished sentences no historian can fully pin down. Marion pulls a fresh sheet of paper from a drawer, slips it into the typewriter with a satisfying clack. She glances at you, smiles like you've just been handed a secret too precious to say aloud. On her notepad, she scrawled, "They kept the world running line by line." You lean over her shoulder for a moment and read the lines she's typed so far. Simple words, clipped sentences, each one holding a heartbeat from the past. Outside traffic hums past the library's brick walls, oblivious to the echoes inside. As you step away, the tape whirs on the keys, click, and the woman's voice from decades ago floats through the hush. A promise that even when the rivet guns and sewing needles fell silent, the stories kept working. Overtime stitching memories into pages someone would one day find and read by the glow of a desk lamp, long after the factories closed for good. Step out of the dusty hush of the library and into the steady hum of an office building that could be anywhere. Steel beams, glass walls, cubicles stacked like honeycombs. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the faint echoes of those factory floors, the secret sewing rooms, the midnight trains still rattling beneath the polished tile. Here, in the everyday chatter of keyboards and coffee breaks, the echoes in today's workforce live on whispers of women who proved once that the world doesn't spin without their hands on the wheel. You stand near a glass door that swings open and shut every few seconds, letting in the breeze of modern ambition. Inside, rows of desks stretch beneath fluorescent lights that hum a tired lullaby. A woman named Sheila Hare, twisted into a bun blazer, draped over the back of her chair, leans over a spreadsheet that looks nothing like a rivet gun, but feels just as heavy when the clock reads past quitting time. One fact hums beneath the air conditioning. In the decades since Rosie's sisters laid down their wrenches and swapped uniforms for typewriters, women have returned, stayed left, come back again, always pushing at the edges of who gets paid, who gets heard, who stays standing when the pink slips come. Historians still debate whether the seeds planted by wartime work sprouted into true equality or just laid the groundwork for another generation to ask the same question. What is our labor worth? Sheila taps at her keyboard, checks her watch, sips cold coffee. A meeting drags on in a glass conference room inside a young woman tries to make her point between polite interruptions. Her voice is steady, her notes precise, her paycheck likely smaller than the man tapping his pen 3 seats down. A quirky truth threads through the break room chatter. Many offices still run on invisible glue schedules, juggled by mothers who work late from kitchen tables. Conference calls muted so no one hears the dishwasher hum in the background. The old posters are gone, but the question is the same. Who keeps the lights on when no one's watching? Sheila stands, stretches her shoulders, and checks her phone. A text from her mother pops up, an old photo of a grandmother in coveralls, a smudge of grease across her cheek. The caption, just 3 words. She was Rosie. The family never talked much about it, but the proof is there in black and white, a reminder that these spreadsheets, these closed-door meetings, these polite debates about raises and promotions have roots tangled deep in shipyards and sewing rooms where fair pay was once a daydream stapled to a lunch pail. Some scholars remain puzzled at how slow the wheel still turns. The Equal Pay Act came and went, lawsuits filed, and one glass ceilings cracked but somehow never fully swept away. Yet here sits Sheila, shoulders squared, fingers drumming the desk, ready to add her own stubborn line to a ledger that's been open since Rosie first picked up a rivet gun. A printer clatters to life in the corner, spitting out forms that track hours' salaries, project milestones. Its hum mingles with the ghostly clatter of typewriters and punch clocks, each keystroke a faint echo of the questions the wartime women first asked. If I can build your bombers, sew your parachutes, sort your mail ride, your trains, why not pay me like you mean it? Sheila powers down her screen, slides a notebook into her bag, and catches your eye as she reaches for the door. She doesn't say much, just a nod, a half smile, that says the story isn't finished yet. And maybe that's the point. The echo never ends. It drifts forward in the hush between closing doors and fresh ambitions in the chatter of new recruits who don't know their walking paths once carved by Rosie's many sisters. As you step back into the lobby's quiet hum, you feel it, the faint thrum of rivet guns sewing needles' steam whistles, the same soft chorus that reminds the world we kept it running then. We're keeping it running now. And so you drift back away from factory floors and flickering lanterns, away from coated whispers and sugar-dusted canteens. Let the echoes settle around you, soft as a rivet gun gone quiet, gentle as a silk parachute unfolding in the night sky. Close your eyes and hear them, the laughter of Rosie's sisters beneath steel beams, the hush of nurses smoothing sheets in dim tents, the rustle of letters bundled tight against the cold. Imagine them leaning over sewing machines and farm gates riding midnight trains, pressing ink to paper so their secrets wouldn't vanish into the noise of peacetime. Tonight, their stories wrap around you like a wool blanket passed down through busy hands, mended at the edges, warm with memory. The world they helped keep running still spins on borrowed momentum, every click of a keyboard or clang of a factory bell, carrying a quiet promise that work done in the shadows never truly disappears. So breathe in the hush they left behind. Exhale the worry of tomorrow's alarm clock. Let your thoughts wander where ration books and telegrams can't follow into dreams of tin lunch pails, riveted wings, and tiny notes slipped into pockets that still wait to be found. If you'd like to drift back into these stories again, you can always subscribe softly so the past doesn't stir too loudly. And before you drift off, maybe share a whisper. What piece of hidden history do you carry in your pocket waiting to be told when the world quiets down?